Imagine being loved the way you have always dreamed of being loved. Not just noticed, not just appreciated, but fully, overwhelmingly, completely adored. Every morning begins with messages that make your chest ache with gratitude. Every evening ends with someone telling you that you are the most extraordinary person they have ever met. You did not ask for it. You did not expect it, but it arrived like a wave, warm and all-consuming, and you thought to yourself, finally, someone sees me. This is the story of love bombing, and it begins always with the most beautiful lie you have ever been told. The term love bombing was first used to describe a recruitment technique, not in dating, not in romance, in cults. In the 1970s, psychologists studying groups like the Unification Church noticed that new recruits were welcomed with an astonishing flood of warmth, attention, and praise. They were hugged, celebrated, told they were special, told they had been chosen, and within weeks, many of them gave up their savings, their families, and their identities. The psychologist Robert Lifton, who studied thought reform in the 1960s, described this pattern with a phrase. He called it milieu control. You control the environment so completely that the person inside it loses their frame of reference. Love bombing is the emotional version of this. You flood someone with so much affection that they lose their ability to evaluate it. But love bombing did not stay in the language of cult research. It moved into the language of relationships. Because the pattern, as it turns out, is exactly the same. A person meets someone new. Within days, the messages are constant. Good morning. Good night. How are you? I miss you. You are incredible. I have never met anyone like you. The compliments are not generic. They are sharp, precise, aimed at exactly the parts of you that have always felt unseen. And that is the cruelty of it. Love bombing does not target your weaknesses. It targets your deepest needs. Erich Fromm, in his 1956 masterpiece, The Art of Loving, made a distinction that most people never learn. He said there are two kinds of love. Mature love says I love you because I understand you. Immature love says I love you because I need you. Love bombing belongs to the second kind. It is not generosity, it is hunger. The person who love bombs you does not see you as a soul to be known. They see you as a void to be filled with their own need for control. But you do not see that, not at first. Because it feels for the first time in your life like someone has finally turned on a light inside a room you had forgotten was dark. And then, without warning, the light goes out. This is the phase that clinicians call devaluation. The compliments stop. The message is slow. The person who told you daily that you were extraordinary now seems irritated by your presence. They cancel plans. They go silent for days. When you ask what is wrong, they look at you as if you're being unreasonable. The shift is so sudden that your first instinct is not anger. It is self-doubt. What did I do wrong? What changed? Was it something I said? And that, says the psychiatrist Judith Herman, is exactly how trauma bonds are formed. In her landmark book Trauma and Recovery, she explains that what makes an abusive bond so powerful is not the cruelty. It is the intermittent reinforcement. The alternation between warmth and withdrawal. When love is constant, you take it for granted. When it is absent, you grieve and eventually move on. But when it appears and disappears without logic or pattern, your brain locks onto it like a gambler staring at a slot machine. The psychologist B.F. Skinner demonstrated this in the 1950s with pigeons. When rewards came on a fixed schedule, the pigeons stayed calm. When rewards came randomly, the pigeons became frantic. They pecked and pecked, endlessly, desperately, because they never knew when the next reward would arrive. Love bombing creates the same loop. The initial flood of affection is the first big payout. Everything after that, every crumb of returned warmth, is a random reward. And you keep pulling the lever. Fromm understood something about this that most people still do not. In Escape from Freedom, he argued that the deepest human fear is not loneliness. It is the burden of being a separate self. We are so terrified of standing alone that we will attach ourselves to anyone who promises to erase that separateness, even if the promise is a lie. And that is why love bombing works so devastatingly well on people who are smart, successful, and emotionally aware. Because it does not exploit stupidity, it exploits longing. There are signs. There are always signs. The first is speed. Genuine connection takes time. It moves in slow, careful circles. Love bombing moves in a straight line at full velocity. The second sign is symmetry, or rather, the lack of it. In healthy early romance, both people move at roughly the same pace. In love bombing, the intensity is radically one-sided. One person is pouring everything out. The other is simply receiving. The third sign is isolation. The love bomber wants all of your time. They want to be your first message and your last. They grow hurt or quiet or cold when you spend an evening with friends instead of with them. They frame this as devotion. It is not. It is perimeter control. The fourth sign is the future. Within days or weeks, they're talking about forever. Moving in, meeting parents, building a life. Not as a conversation, but as a declaration. As if the decision has already been made. The philosopher Martin Buber wrote about what he called the I-thou relationship, a meeting between two people in which each truly sees the other as a complete, independent being. Love bombing is the opposite. It is an I-it relationship. The other person is not a person. They are a project, a conquest, a mirror in which the bomber sees only their own reflection. And here is the part that no one wants to hear. Sometimes the person doing the love bombing does not know they are doing it. They genuinely believe they are in love. They genuinely believe this intensity is real. But as from warned, the feeling of love and the practice of love are not the same thing. A person can feel overwhelming emotion toward you and still be using you as a drug. The emotion is real. The love is not. If you're in the middle of this right now, there is something you need to understand. The withdrawal you are feeling, the desperation to get back to how it was in the beginning, that is not love. That is addiction. Your nervous system has been conditioned to associate this person with a neurochemical high, and now it is in withdrawal. The neuroscientist Helen Fisher studied the brains of people going through intense romantic rejection. The scans were nearly identical to those of people experiencing cocaine withdrawal. The same regions lit up. The same craving patterns emerged. So how do you break free? The honest answer is that it is one of the hardest things a person can do. Because you're not just leaving a relationship. You're leaving a version of yourself that felt, for the first time, truly loved. The psychotherapist Pete Walker, who specialized in complex trauma, said the first step is to recognize the pattern for what it is. Not a relationship, a cycle, idealization, devaluation, discard, and then, when you try to leave, the hoover. The sudden return of warmth, the apology, the promise that will be different this time. It will not be different. Fromm is clear about this. A person who treats love as a possession, as a tool, as a strategy, does not change because they promise to. They change only when they learn to tolerate their own separateness. And most never do. The second step is silence. Not negotiation, not explanation, not one last conversation. Silence. Because every word you give them is another thread they can pull. The third step, and the hardest one, is to grieve. Not the person, the illusion. The version of love you thought you had found. The version of yourself you thought someone finally saw. That grief is real. It deserves to be honored. But it is grief for something that never existed. And naming that truth is how you begin to walk out of the fire. There's a line from the poet Rainer Maria Rilke that has stayed with me. He wrote, "For one human being to love another, that is perhaps the most difficult of all our tasks. The ultimate, the last test and proof. The work for which all other work is merely preparation. Love bombing is the counterfeit of that work. It offers the feeling without the labor, the warmth without the patience, the words without the substance. Real love is quiet. It does not need to announce itself. It does not need to overwhelm you to prove it exists. It simply stays, day after day, without performance, without conditions. And if someone is filling your life with noise so loud you cannot hear yourself think, ask yourself this: what are they trying to drown out? The answer, almost always, is the sound of your own judgment, the part of you that already knows.